Alright, everybody, and we are back today discussing our second team in Los Angeles, second team in the NFC West, that of course being the Rams. And the Rams, so to give a little bit of background on the Rams, of course they did play in St. Louis from 1995 until 2015, and really pretty much that last decade they were in St. Louis, not a lot of postseason success. Um, from 2005 all the way through their first season in Los Angeles, even over that 12 season span, they only make the playoffs. Well, actually, zero times. They don't make the playoffs any times, and they don't have any winning seasons. They only have one season here where they avoid a losing record in 2006. So, absolutely brutal stretch, but brighter days are ahead. And in more recent times, with Sean McVay as the head coach beginning in 2017, of those 6 seasons under head coach McVay, they have made the playoffs 4 of those 6 seasons, and the first 4 of those were under with quarterback, I guess I should say, Jared Goff underneath of Coach McVay, and they were able to reach Super Bowl 53 in 2018 after going 13-3 in the regular season. Although Jared Goff did get traded after the 2020 season to Detroit. Then, as we know more recently, Matthew Stafford enters the picture. The Rams go 12-5 in 2021, end up winning Super Bowl 56 on SoFi Field, or SoFi Stadium, I guess I should say, that field. Really a storybook ending for that 2021 Rams offense and that entire team as a whole. But fast forward to 2022, things really sort of come crashing down for them. And now would be a good time to take a look at the 2022 Rams more in depth here. So, they go from winning the Super Bowl to a 5-12 record. Reality really sets in for this Rams team, and I guess to give a little bit more background on the Rams, they did trade several first-round picks during their time in Los Angeles. Pretty much since they moved to Los Angeles, they had traded their first-round pick just about every season they had been there, whether it was for Brandon Cooks or Jalen Ramsey, then later on Matthew Stafford. So seems like that's finally starting to catch up with the Rams. The clock's finally starting to strike midnight, and they did end up winning the Super Bowl. And you can never take away Super Bowl 56, of course, but doesn't necessarily mean that going forward the Rams are in an ideal spot. And I think we're really going to see that as we go through this team more in depth for 2022, and more importantly as we look ahead to 2023. So, what went wrong in 2022 for the Rams? Because heading into this season, I mean, it wasn't necessarily expected that the Rams were going to repeat last season, but I think people were certainly expecting more than a 5-12 finish from the Los Angeles Rams. Playoffs were definitely something that wasn't really unheard of. I think a lot of people were expecting the Rams to at least be in the playoffs. Maybe not necessarily winning the NFC West, but I think before the season, if you took a straw poll of fans and asked, yeah, besides the San Francisco 49ers, what team from the NFC West is going to make the playoffs, the Rams would have definitely ran away with that poll, at least more so than the Seattle Seahawks, who did end up making the playoffs. So looking down here at the Rams team rankings among the league, definitely a bottom 5 offense in the National Football League last season. Dead last in terms of yards gained on offense and sixth from the bottom in terms of points scored. That's simply not going to be good enough to win football games. And then you look at the defense, really not much better. Still a below average unit in the NFL, although probably right around 20th in terms of overall defensive ranking last season. But looking at their schedule last season, we can really start to get an idea of where things start to go awry, because right away, being the team that won the Super Bowl, they host the inaugural game of the 2022 campaign at home at SoFi Stadium, where they won Super Bowl 56 against the Buffalo Bills, who were a team that lost in that just absolutely heartbreaking divisional round loss to the Kansas City Chiefs in 2021, and they were largely seen as a team that was looking to end up raising their own banner after watching the Rams raise theirs. So Buffalo comes into the Rams' house and they just absolutely curb stomp them. This game really wasn't even particularly close. The Bills end up winning it 31-10, and really just sets the tone for the Rams season. Although looking ahead here it doesn't really get too bad after that. They have a Week 7 bye, and heading into that Week 7 bye, they're sitting with a 3-3 record. So at that point, you're like, okay, I mean, the Rams probably aren't among the NFC's elite this season. That much was clear, but at the very least, the Rams were still a team that probably could have made a push for the NFC playoff picture. But coming out of the bye week, they lose 6 straight games here to drop to 3-9, and that really just puts them in a tough spot. And they end up finishing with a 2-9 record after the bye week to get them to 5-12 overall. And we can even look at these wins that they do get. Only one of them against the NFC West, so they end up going 1-5 within their own division, and that includes losing to the Arizona Cardinals, who were one of the worst teams, one of the only teams worse than the Los Angeles Rams last season. So definitely not going to be making a playoff push if you're going 1-5 in your own division. Moving along, we can look at. I just thought this was a little bit interesting too. I will point out the Rams were first in terms of fourth down offense last season, and they're actually first in terms of red zone defense. But as you can see, their defense was second worst on fourth down as well. So just a very odd team last season, this Los Angeles Rams squad. But as we move down to the more individual statistics, Matthew Stafford returns for his second season in Los Angeles after going all the way to the Super Bowl victory in his first season, and was not the storybook ending this year by any means in 2022. He starts just 9 games because of an injury-shortened campaign and throws for just over 2,000 yards, 10 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions. So definitely nothing too impressive from Matthew Stafford here. In fact, it's really quite poor statistics for Matthew Stafford, all things considered, especially considering what the assets they gave up for him and the contract they gave him to pair with that. So we have a whole collection of other players here starting games for the Los Angeles Rams. We have John Wolford starts 3 games for them, doesn't impress. Bryce Perkins starts a game, doesn't impress. And they even bring in Baker Mayfield off of waivers from the Carolina Panthers. And despite the fact that he only had about 2 days of prep, I believe his first game was this Thursday night game against the Las Vegas Raiders. He actually ends up winning it 17-6, but Baker really doesn't do anything tremendous either. He did better than Stafford, but that really wasn't saying much last season. So moving along, we can see for the rushing statistics, really not much of a ground presence for the Los Angeles Rams last season. Cam Akers leading the way with 786 yards and 7 touchdowns. Definitely a bounce back campaign for Cam Akers. Love to see that, but not too much support behind him. Darrell Henderson had decent amount of attempts here with just 70, but I mean, he did impress considering it was only 70 attempts, but geez, the Rams just really didn't want to run the ball, it seems. I guess that's to be expected with a passing game background coach like Sean McVay, but taking a glance over at the receiving stats now, Cooper Kupp, much like Matthew Stafford, only plays 9 games last season because his season was shortened by injury. But unlike Matthew Stafford, who looked horrific in the 9 games he was out there, Cooper Kupp looked like he didn't miss a beat from the 2021 season. So in only 9 games, he gets 812 yards and 6 receptions, and then another 52 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown to pair with that. If he were to play all 17 games last season, we could sort of project those stats. Probably have somewhere around 1,500 receiving yards and maybe 10 touchdowns. So definitely another solid campaign for Cooper Kupp, and look forward to seeing him back on the field healthy this season. But beyond Cooper Kupp, really not too much going on at the receiver position. Their only other notable receiver was really their tight end, Tyler Higbee, and he does play all 17 games, so it gave them a consistent option at wide receiver. Well, consistent receiving option, I suppose I should say, because their actual wide receivers, besides Cooper Kupp, like Van Jefferson and Allen Robinson, both missed extended time as well. But moving along to the defense now. Looking at this Rams defense, they do have a few notable players here. Aaron Donald, of course, and seems to be the trend with this Rams team. Injury-shortened season for Aaron Donald as well, but in just 11 games, he gets 5 sacks, a fumble recovery, a forced fumble, 2 pass deflections, 11 quarterback hits, and 10 tackles for a loss. And Even becomes one of the two players for the Rams to earn Pro Bowl honors, despite the fact that he did only play 11 games. So Aaron Donald continues to be the gold standard of defensive linemen, despite the fact that he actually very nearly retired following Super Bowl 56. And I'd be interested to see if he sticks around beyond this season if the Rams really don't improve that much. But some of the other notable players on this defense, Leonard Floyd and Bobby Wagner, a pair of linebackers here, also above age 30. Leonard Floyd with 9 sacks, Bobby Wagner another 6. Leonard Floyd has 22 quarterback hits, and Bobby Wagner another 10. Each of these guys have 10 tackles for a loss, much like Aaron Donald. Then Leonard Floyd has a fumble recovery, while Bobby Wagner has 5 pass deflections. So solid stuff from those guys. And then that doesn't even include Jalen Ramsey, who for the last few seasons now has been their lockdown #1 cornerback. We know what Jalen Ramsey's capable of ever since he came into the league with the Jacksonville Jaguars. He's been one of the best corners in the National Football League, and last year at age 28, no exception. Starts all 17 games for the Los Angeles Rams. 4 interceptions, 2 forced fumbles, fumble recovery, even 2 sacks, 2 quarterback hits, and 4 tackles for a loss as a defensive back. And he is the other player to earn Pro Bowl honors for the Los Angeles Rams. So definitely some talent on that defense last season, but now would probably be a good time to go look at the Rams 2023 offseason. Because as we'll see in a second here, the Rams do lose a ton of talent this past offseason, a lot of it on the defensive side of the football. So let's just start rattling them off. Both those players I just mentioned at linebacker, Bobby Wagner and Leonard Floyd, both depart in free agency. Bobby Wagner goes back to the Seattle Seahawks, where he played for many, many years. And then Leonard Floyd takes off for the Buffalo Bills, where he might even be more of an edge rusher there on, because I believe Buffalo runs a 4-3. And another player I will mention, as we just talked about a second ago, Jalen Ramsey gets traded to the Miami Dolphins for really pennies on the dollar. They trade him for a backup tight end and a 3rd-round draft pick. So really just more of a salary dump move on the Rams' part. And when we get to the end of this video, we will discuss more. Excuse me, have a bit of a cough there. As we get to the end of this video, we will discuss more of what the Rams' big overall plan is for the big picture. What is their master plan for beyond 2023? Because looking at this offseason, as we'll see, really doesn't seem like they're too focused on success this season, despite the fact that they are still keeping Matthew Stafford, Cooper Kupp, Aaron Donald, because they lose Bobby Wagner, Jalen Ramsey, and Leonard Floyd here for really nothing in return. Then they also lose both of their starting safeties. They lose Nick Scott to the Cincinnati Bengals and Taylor Rapp to the Buffalo Bills. So pretty much a massive overhaul in the secondary. Then even on the defensive line, they lose Greg Gaines, who was one of their more productive defensive linemen last season, to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Then beyond those guys, I will also mention 2 players on the offensive side of the ball. They lose Allen Robinson to the Pittsburgh Steelers and Baker Mayfield, who, I mean, they did just scoop him up mid-season because Matt Stafford was injured, but he figures to be the starting quarterback in Tampa Bay, at least to start the season. But definitely intriguing to see that, because if Matthew Stafford goes down to injury again, which is entirely possible with his track record, they really don't have much of an insurance policy in place. But maybe that is part of the Rams' plan, as we'll see here in a second. Because now we look at the players they do bring in, and compared to that long list of players who just departed the Rams, including 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 defensive starters that left in the offseason, they're really only acquiring 3 players here total of note, and one of them is on the offensive side of the ball. So they do acquire John Johnson, the safety from the Cleveland Browns, as we mentioned in that video, and he certainly will help negate the loss of Nick Scott and Taylor Rapp, but John Johnson is one individual, but Nick Scott and Taylor Rapp are 2. And then Jalen Ramsey, of course, also departed at the cornerback position. And they bring in Akello Witherspoon from the Pittsburgh Steelers down here, but I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say Akello Witherspoon isn't going to give them the production that Jalen Ramsey did this past season. That's just a bit of a hunch on my part, though. I don't know. We'll definitely see. And then finally, I'll mention Demarcus Robinson, originally of the Kansas City Chiefs, but more recently last year played for the Baltimore Ravens. He figures to replace the other Robinson we mentioned, Allen Robinson, who left for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So, bit of a lateral move there. I'd say they're probably about on par in terms of what kind of role they can provide the Rams on offense. Maybe Allen Robinson is the slightly better player, but Demarcus Robinson might be able to play in more games because Allen Robinson definitely has a track record of being injured, which is never a good thing. So overall, in this free agency here, Rams lose a ton of talent, especially on defense, and they really don't bring in much to replace it. So that then begs the question for a team that only won 5 games last year, if they want to improve, they're going to need a big draft. So let's take a look at their draft class here. But looking at this draft class, the first thing that'll stick out to you is they don't even have their first round pick, and that is because they traded it as part of the Matthew Stafford trade. So it would have been 6th overall. That selection ends up going to the Detroit Lions, who, as we mentioned in that video, actually ended up trading out of the 6th overall selection. So as a result, the Rams don't even get on the board until the second round at the 36th overall pick. And here they do take a player that will certainly help them this year in Steve Avila. He's listed as a center here, but he's probably going to play guard for the Rams out of TCU. And then another notable player, Byron Young, in the 3rd round, probably going to start on this Rams defense this season, largely just out of necessity. But as we go down here, the Rams do have a lot of late round picks. As a result of compensation selections and trades, they did lose a lot of talent this season. But really just more of depth pieces here. They draft another quarterback in the 4th round. They draft some defensive line help in the 3rd. Really just trying to add young pieces to this roster. They really do a good job of spreading out these draft picks to different positions too, because they really need a lot. They need a little bit of everything right now, I would say. The Rams really aren't in a particularly strong position roster personnel-wise, so guess with that being said, this is what we're rolling with. So let's take a look at how Sean McVay is going to try to put this together for the 2023 Rams. Now, looking at the Rams 2023 depth chart, and I will say this definitely is a little bit ugly, I'm not going to lie, just after taking a quick glance at this before this video. I suppose we could start off with the quarterback position. So Matthew Stafford is returning this season and figures to be healthy at least week 1. But behind him right now is probably the rookie Stetson Bennett, who has definitely impressed in training camp, and I definitely wonder if he's sort of a long-term project for Sean McVay as a potential successor for Matthew Stafford. They do also bring in Brett Ripon from Denver to potentially be a backup, but I think this is Stetson Bennett's job right now as the number 2 quarterback. Then looking at the running back room, beyond Cam Akers as the starter, there's really not much going on here. They have Kyron Williams, the second-year player, behind him, but by and large, I expect this to be Cam Akers' job. Potentially even Zach Evans, the rookie, could maintain some reps here, but we shall see. Definitely going to be interesting to see how this Rams backfield unfolds, because I know Sean McVay is very big on the committee, but doesn't really seem like they have the personnel to support one right now. Then looking at the tight end position, Tyler Higbee, probably the most consistent player last year on this Rams offense for all 17 games, definitely slated to be the starter here. And then backup Hunter Long's actually on the PUP list, but it's not the end of the world because 4th-year man Bryson Hopkins has looked very good at training camp, and honestly I expect him to maintain this number 2 tight end position, potentially even once Hunter Long is healthy. And then they do also have Davis Allen, who they drafted in the 5th round this year to potentially provide some insurance, but if the first 2 guys here are healthy, I don't really envision him seeing the field too much. Then I suppose we could go to the wide receiver position next. So looking at wide receiver, Cooper Kupp's absolutely their number 1 option here, probably the best player on this offense as a whole. And Van Jefferson, the 4th-year player, is likely their number 2 receiver, although there is a competition going on for this number 3 receiver spot. So some of the names in the mix right now, we have Ben Shirokin, the 3rd-year player. We have the rookie Puka Nasa, the veteran acquisition Demarcus Robinson, and 3rd-year man Tutu Atwell. As of right now, I think this is probably Demarcus Robinson's job, although Puka Nasa, I believe I'm pronouncing that name correctly, the rookie, he has looked well in training camp thus far, so Potentially, if things go south for LA this season, or if there's another injury in the wide receiving core, he could see some increased reps as the season goes along, for sure. Then finally, we'll look at this offensive line, which definitely is raising the most alarm bells for me. If this Rams offense really wants to be relevant this season, they're going to need strong play from the offensive line. And I will be honest, out of all the offensive lines we discussed thus far, I think the only team in a worse situation than the Rams right now is Arizona, which is certainly not good because Arizona, as we saw, is likely going to be at the bottom of the league this season. So we could look at this offensive line position by position, and there's a lot of position battles going on here, which is very telling because that just shows the Rams don't really have confidence in a lot of these guys. It's not even like prior years where they had somebody like an Andrew Whitworth, just somebody you know you can rely on at the left tackle spot. Like there really isn't one player like that on at any of these five positions right now. Funny enough, I guess we could start with the left guard position. The rookie Steve Avila is probably going to be their most reliable player on the offensive line, at least right now. Probably the only position that's really not up for grabs right now. And that's really telling that you're having a rookie in the second round step in and potentially being your best offensive lineman right away. Then, looking at the left tackle position, there is a competition going on here between Joe Noteboom and where is he at here? Alaric Jackson right behind him. And as of right now, I do expect Joe Noteboom to maintain this job, but it is telling that you have a competition going on here for the starting left tackle spot. Never a good sign. And it doesn't end there because there's also a battle going on for the starting center position between Brian Allen and Coleman Shelton. And as it's listed here, I do expect Brian Allen will likely be the starter. Although if Brian Allen does remain the starter, Coleman Shelton could potentially compete for the right guard position, where there's another competition going on. And here we have Tremaine Ankrum Jr. competing against a couple guys. So potentially Coleman Shelton, like I mentioned, but also this swing tackle here, Logan Bruss. So Rob Havenstein is likely going to be their starting right tackle. He's probably the next most reliable bet after Steve Avila on this offensive line, but Logan Bruss, who's probably their best reserve tackle, could potentially be competing for the starting right guard position as well. Although at the moment it is likely Tremaine Ankrum Jr.'s job. But geez, really not a lot of encouraging stuff on this offensive line. And for a quarterback like Matthew Stafford, who's had a lot of durability concerns over the course of his career, and he's now entering his late 30s, you're going to want to have him protected. And it certainly doesn't seem like that's what the Rams have in mind for him this year. And then you don't really have a backup with a lot of starting experience here. Your backup's actually going to be a fourth round rookie, it would appear. So it's not like you brought back Baker Mayfield as like, well, if Matthew Stafford goes down, at least we could maybe cross our fingers that Baker Mayfield can lead this offense to somewhat success. But I don't know. Really just not encouraged by this Rams offense right now. And it starts with the offensive line. If they had a great offensive line, it'd be one thing that the receiving core really doesn't have too much going on after Cooper Kupp right now. That'd be one thing that they don't have much in the running back room past Cam Akers, who's far from a sure thing himself. And that their most consistent player on offense last year was Tyler Higbee, who's a fringe top 10 tight end. And that they have a 35-year-old Matt Stafford who missed half the season last year and didn't look good in the games he was in there. But all that comes back to the offensive line too, because if they had a good offensive line, you can overlook some of those things. But with a poor offensive line, those potential red flags become major red flags. And all this could collapse in on itself like we saw last year with the 2022 Rams. And I definitely have my doubts about this offense getting back to 2021 form. But with that being said, let's take a look at the defense to see if this will be any better. So, sorry for the coughing today, guys, but looking at the defense now, this defensive line is, I mean, I'd say it's better than the offensive line at that, but that's really just because of Aaron Donald. Past Aaron Donald, there's just a bunch of unknowns here right now. And Aaron Donald's now in his 10th season with the Los Angeles Rams. And Like I mentioned earlier, he very nearly retired before the 2022 campaign. This was a player who already got his Super Bowl ring that he wanted for so many years. He's already got his money more than secured. He's gotten his individual accolades. Really doesn't have much left to prove at this point. So if you have him surrounded with really just a bunch of unknowns, I don't know. Doesn't seem like a recipe for success for this defensive line. They do have Kobe Turner, the third round pick, so they have a little bit of youth potentially being injected here, but as of right now, their starters alongside Aaron Donald are projected to be Marquise Copeland and then Bobby Brown III at nose tackle. So I'd say overall, this Rams defensive line is certainly a below average unit in the NFL. But hey, they run a 3-4, right? If you have Aaron Donald as one of your three down linemen, these four linebackers should be amazing, right? That's how it was last year with Bobby Wagner in the fold, and that's how it was last year when they had Leonard Floyd in the fold. So who do they have this year? Well, actually, not a whole lot. So starting on the outside, they have Michael Hochit, or Michael Hocht, I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly, Hocht. And then on the other side, they have third round draft pick Byron Young. And both of these guys are pretty young, as a matter of fact, no pun intended. And really not a whole lot behind them on the depth chart. So far at Rams camp this year, it seems like the goal of the defensive staff has been to just absolutely load these guys up with a ton of reps to try to get them as much experience as possible before the season starts. And that's certainly a good thing for their development, but definitely seems like it's going to be a major step back from the production that they had last season at the linebacker position. And God forbid if one of these guys does start to develop and gets injured, they really don't have much of an insurance plan there. Then looking at the inside linebacker position, they have Ernest Jones starting alongside Christian Rosenboom, or Roseboom. So really not too much at the inside linebacker position either here. Looks like just a bunch of undrafted rookies from over the years paired with Ernest Jones, drafted in the third round in 2021. But I don't know if this is just a symptom of the fact that the Rams haven't had any first round picks recently, or if this is just the coaching staff overestimating their ability to develop these guys, but so far in this front seven, just really poor personnel. And then we look at the secondary here, and it just gets even worse. This might even be, I mean no disrespect to the Rams when I say this, this might be the worst secondary in football. I really do mean that. So looking at this secondary here, obviously they lost both of their starting safeties last year and Jalen Ramsey, so you know it's not going to be great, but right now they have Akello Witherspoon projected to be their number one cornerback alongside sixth round pick from last year, Darian Kendrick. And keep in mind, Akello Witherspoon, we can flash back here real quick. He played just 23% of defensive snaps for Pittsburgh last year at age 27, so definitely not encouraging. He kind of, like, he's at that age where he kind of is what he is. Maybe the Rams coaching staff thinks they can develop him a little bit, but definitely seems like Akello Witherspoon is not number one cornerback material for a team with Aaron Donald on the same defense. Definitely a downgrade from Jalen Ramsey. Then we look at the starting safety positions here, and we do have John Johnson III and Jordan Fuller. So, I mean, it's a little bit better than the cornerback position, but not really too much. And then we'll mention Quentin Lake here has certainly impressed at training camp, and he's even taken a little bit of reps at linebacker as well, which understandable given the linebacker situation that we just described. But man, and then at the nickel corner they have second-year man Kobe Durant. So really on this entire defense, no notable players at all outside of Aaron Donald. Really nobody I can look at and say, you know what, when the chips are down, at least I know this guy can make a play for us. Just so many unproven young guys here, and not really ones that have a particularly high ceiling either. Unless the Rams coaching staff really has faith that their defensive staff is going to elevate the talent here, this could be a pretty bad defense this year. Then paired with an offense that has really a shell of an offensive line, a 35-year-old quarterback, a pretty shallow running back room, and a receiving core that doesn't really have much of a standout player besides Cooper Kupp, it really just brings me questioning, like, are the Rams doing, like, a soft tank job this year. I don't even want to say that because they do still have Matthew Stafford, Cooper Kupp, Aaron Donald, but besides those three guys, like, do the Rams want to win this year? Like, I'm really just scratching my head on this. Like, none of their moves are really indicating to me that they want to try to compete for 2023. So, with that being said, let's take a look at this 2023 Rams schedule. Now, looking at the Rams schedule, I do have them projected to finish 6 and 11. And honestly, after going through this roster, I think that might be a little bit generous, honestly. So, let's do this a little bit game by game here. Schedule definitely starts out tough against two divisional opponents, Seattle and San Francisco, and I anticipate both of these games being losses. I don't think that's too controversial. Then week 3, they're on Monday night in a Super Bowl rematch against the Cincinnati Bengals, and boy, talk about just 2 years later, two teams that met in the Super Bowl just trending in completely opposite directions. Cincinnati went to the conference championship last year, very close to Super Bowl 57, and this year I think they're absolutely at the forefront of teams looking to get to Super Bowl 58, but the Rams I don't think could be further from Super Bowl 58 right now. I really hate to say it. Yeah, they do have Sean McVay as their coach still. They do have Matthew Stafford, Cooper Kupp, and Aaron Donald, but like we just saw, it's a pretty desolate roster outside of those notable names. So I think Cincinnati wins this game running away. Then in week 4 against the Colts, I do think they do pick up a win here. Indianapolis is a very inexperienced team at the moment with their young quarterback Anthony Richardson. Very raw product. He's figuring things out on the job as kind of as he goes. So give the Rams a win here, but then week 5 against the Philadelphia Eagles, I really don't see a scenario where the Rams win this matchup. Week 6 against the Cardinals, I could see the Rams picking this one up only because Arizona might be even worse than the Rams this season. The Rams at least have a better coaching staff and a few key players I know can make some plays on offense and suppose Aaron Donald on defense. Then in week 7, they get Pittsburgh coming off of their bye, and Pittsburgh with Mike Tomlin with the guys coming off of 2 weeks of prep and rest against this team. Yeah, I like the Steelers' chances. And then they get the Cowboys the following week coming off of Dallas's bye. So again, like the Cowboys there, just personnel-wise. Week 9 against the Green Bay Packers. I do give this one to the Rams. It's still relatively early in the season. It's about midway through the season. Honestly, would not be surprised if Green Bay ends up winning this game. And honestly, for Green Bay's sake, I kind of hope they do because I think Green Bay at least has a shot at the NFC playoffs where I don't really believe Los Angeles does at the moment. So then going into their Week 10 bye, I have them at a 2-7 record, and I'm sorry, 3-6, excuse me. I have them at a 3-6 record, and honestly, that's being pretty generous. I feel. I think that's sort of a best case scenario for them. I would love to be wrong for the Rams' sake, but I think 3 wins is probably their ceiling. More realistically, probably 2, maybe even 1 win here, but I think at the very least they could beat the Cardinals and the Colts. Coming out of the bye, they have 2 more divisional matchups here actually. At home against Seattle. I think Seattle takes this one even though the Rams have the extra rest. Maybe the Rams can make this one a little bit competitive. Then the following week I give them the nod over Arizona just because, like with the first Arizona matchup, I think this is one of the few teams the Rams are firmly better than. Then moving along, Cleveland, Baltimore in back-to-back weeks here. Cleveland's the better team. Then Baltimore with 2 weeks of rest. Seems like they're playing a lot of teams coming off of their bye too. So Baltimore coming off of 2 weeks of rest. I'll give the Ravens the nod here. And then in week 15, they get the Commanders coming off of their bye. So this is probably one of the few matchups where the Rams might stand a chance, but I give this one to Washington. And honestly, I don't even think if they weren't on their bye, it would be much of a debate either. That matchup of Washington's defensive line versus the Rams' offensive line, Matthew Stafford's going to be under pressure all day. And then even looking at the matchup of the Rams' defensive line versus Washington's offensive line, I don't think Washington has a particularly good offensive line. In fact, I think they have one of the weaker offensive lines in the NFL. But that being said, I don't think this Rams defense is really putting too much of a scare into the Commanders' offense. So I give this one to the Commanders. Terry McLaurin going up against that secondary, come on, and Jahan Doxson. And even in the run game with Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson, don't like the Rams' chances there. Then in the final 3 weeks of the season here, They go up against the New Orleans Saints, the New York Giants, and the San Francisco 49ers. Definitely think San Francisco defeats the Rams, but I did give the Rams wins over the Saints and Giants, but honestly, I would not be surprised if they drop both of these games as well. Granted, we haven't gone through the Saints and Giants rosters yet, and I'm not as high on the Saints as a lot of people are this season. And I could really say the same for the New York Giants as well. I have the Giants projected to finish 4-13, which I certainly think is harsh, and same with the New Orleans Saints at 5-12. So the fact that I have the Los Angeles Rams finishing better than them at 6-11, I would not be surprised if these two games go the other way. And if we just wanted to project that real quick, what that would look like, that would improve the Saints to 6-11. It would improve the Giants to 5-12, and it would drop the Rams to 4-13. And then even if we gave Green Bay this game here too, could potentially put Green Bay in the mix for a playoff position at 8-9, and would drop the Rams to 3-14. Which honestly, now that I'm just thinking about this, I think this is what the Rams might want. Certainly seems what their offseason moves would indicate. And consider this too. I don't have the Rams. We're not going to go over their future draft picks here because they really don't have a lot of movement with their future draft picks. But one thing I will note is that the Rams do actually have their first round pick this year. So if they have a poor showing this season, they could be in for a top 5 pick next season. So in a year as competitive as 2023 is looking to be, maybe this is a year where the Rams kind of just fade into oblivion, end up getting a top 5 pick next year where who knows what they're looking for. They could want another franchise quarterback to replace Matthew Stafford. They could want a franchise left tackle. They could want a new defensive staple. I don't know. This team pretty much needs everything right now besides like the only guy I really think is going to be here for a while and be productive for them is Cooper Kupp, which I suppose now would be a good time to take a look at the Rams salary cap situation. Now, looking at the Rams salary cap, they do have this burden of a Matthew Stafford contract, and reports have been coming out over the offseason that the Rams did actually ask Matthew Stafford to restructure this deal to make it easier for them to get out of it, and rightfully so, Matthew Stafford rejected it, and I don't really blame him because if it weren't for this contract, I think Matthew Stafford would seriously be contemplating retirement right now. Definitely after that Super Bowl win last year, I don't really envision him getting another Super Bowl win in his career at this point. And I don't really see him moving on from the Rams at this point. I think he's going to ride out this contract, stay in sunny Southern California, and finish his career with the Los Angeles Rams, although quite possible that after 2024, the Rams just cut bait with him. So be interested to see how this shakes out. They could even potentially trade him after this season, but I don't even know if Matthew Stafford would be interested in that unless it's to an ideal scenario. Not that Stafford has a no trade clause, but he could just threaten retirement if the Rams try to trade him. I don't know. Be interesting if he wants to walk away from all this money, but as of right now, I pretty much see no circumstance where Matthew Stafford plays out the next 4 seasons with the Los Angeles Rams. So if that is the case, the Rams are going to need another quarterback here soon. Then looking at the running back room, Cam Akers signed for just this season on the last year of his rookie deal. And another thing here, like they're going to need a running back next season. They really don't have much going on. And we can look down at receiver. Outside of Cooper Kupp, signed for the next 4 seasons, like I said, I think he's really the one guy who's going to stick around here. Pretty much nothing at the wide receiver position. Their next 2 best options, Van Jefferson and Demarcus Robinson, both just on a 1-year flyer. Well, Robinson's on a 1-year flyer. Van Jefferson's on the final year of his rookie deal. Looking at tight end, Tyler Higbee, contract year. Down to the offensive line here. Really not a lot of money invested here. No player making over $10 million this season. Rob Havenstein, the right tackle, is the only player really signed to a noticeable cap hit beyond next season for just 3 seasons. Then they do have Joseph Noteboom at left tackle signed for just the next 2 seasons. Steve Avila signed on his rookie deal for the next 4, so they at least have that to fall back on, but the rest of these offensive linemen, in terms of the starters at the very least, not really too many guys locked up long term, so not good for a team that's already very thin on the offensive line. Or maybe it is good because you don't want these guys being paid big money long term. Looking at the defense now, Aaron Donald signed just for the next 2 seasons. I think if he doesn't retire after this season, he almost certainly retires after 2024. We're definitely getting to the end of Aaron Donald's run in the NFL. And honestly, if the Rams are out of contention by week 8, if we're getting to the trade deadline and they're 2-5 or 1-6, or God forbid 0-7, would not be surprised at all if the Rams try to just trade Aaron Donald to the highest bidder, much like they did this offseason with Jalen Ramsey. And it doesn't even have to be a particularly high bid, because the Rams might be a team right now saying, you know what, like, we're just going all in on the rebuild for 2024. We want to just be aggressive with this. We want to clear out the cap space now, so that way in 2024 we'll have high draft picks that we can either use on young talent or we can trade for existing talent, and we'll have cap space to go out and sign free agents to try to become good again as quickly as possible. Because being in that LA market, I do believe the Rams, and playing in SoFi Stadium that Stan Kroenke just spent billions on, while they did win that Super Bowl, they don't want it to just be that one and then the Rams are going to stink for the next 10 years. I know that was kind of, you had to have seen that coming with the moves they made leading up to that Super Bowl, but they're living it now. Like, they kind of have to live with the decisions they've made, and these are the repercussions of it. But moving along now to the linebacker position, pretty much nothing invested here at all. Just a bunch of young players on rookie deals essentially, so not really too much to note there. And then in the secondary, which, as we saw, was absolutely dreadful, they only have 2 players making over $1 million this season, and one of them, Jordan Fuller's, in a contract year. So pretty much a blank slate on this Rams defense outside of Aaron Donald. And then looking at the offense, you can largely say the same thing outside of Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp. So definitely interested to see how the Rams do here, because before I did this series, I anticipated the Rams being a team sort of similar to Denver in the AFC, where they went kind of all in for last season and came up short, but I was in and didn't have their first round pick this year, but I thought with some tweaks they could get back into contention. And I thought Denver did a good job of retooling their roster this offseason. I certainly believe Denver will be a better team this year, but the Rams seem to have taken the opposite approach. They seem to have just let any noticeable talent they had walk, or in the case of Jalen Ramsey, trade him for pennies on the dollar, and really just don't have much left here to work with. I'm interested to see now, like, how long does Aaron Donald stick around? Does he even finish the season with the Rams? Does Sean McVay want to be a part of this thing long term, or does he just get burnt out after the season and need a break from coaching? And maybe he comes back with a different team in 2025, like Sean Payton took a break, or Doug Peterson took a break. Or does Sean Payton just try to become a broadcaster or something? I don't know. Like, it seems like it's going to be dark days ahead for this Rams team. And then Matthew Stafford, do they try to trade him in the 2024 offseason? Do they just cut him in the 2024 offseason? Does he just retire in the 2024 offseason? I really don't know. And then you have Cooper Kupp, which, I mean, shoot, while you're at it, might as well just trade him to the highest bidder too. If you could get 2 first-round picks for Cooper Kupp, if he has a terrific season this year, might as well do it. You stripped everything else on this roster down, why stop there, right? So, love to hear from any Rams fans out there, any NFC West fans out there, pretty much anybody who's had an eye on this roster. How do we think they're going to do this year? Because I really think this thing's going to get worse before it gets better for the Rams. Definitely was surprised to see really the lack of progress they made this offseason. So let me know down below what you think, and I believe our next video is going to be on the Miami Dolphins. So look forward to talking to you guys then.